Imagine driving down a quiet road late at night. The streets are nearly empty. Streetlights stretch across the asphalt, casting long shadows over the pavement. The world feels slow, almost silent. Then suddenly, flashing blue lights appear in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser. The signal is clear. Pull over. The driver eases the car to the side of the road without hesitation. No sudden movements. No frustration. Just calm. The young officer inside the patrol car watches carefully as he steps out. This is routine for him. Another late-night traffic stop. Another driver who probably won't be happy about it. But something about this situation already feels different. The officer walks toward the car with confidence. His footsteps echo softly against the quiet road. Inside the vehicle, the driver waits patiently, both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. No nervous tapping. No irritated gestures. Just stillness. And that kind of calm can be unsettling. Because in situations like this, most people react. Some argue. Some panic. Some try to explain themselves before a single question is asked. But not this driver. The officer reaches the window and shines a flashlight briefly inside the car. For a moment, the light catches the driver's face. A familiar face. Not immediately obvious, but strangely recognizable. The officer squints slightly. Had he seen this man somewhere before? Maybe a movie. Maybe television. But he shakes the thought away quickly. Right now, this is just another stop. Another driver. Another routine check. License and registration, he says firmly. The driver nods once and reaches slowly for the documents. Still calm. Still composed. And that composure begins to create a strange tension in the air. Because when someone refuses to show fear, or irritation, or impatience, the usual balance of control starts to shift. The officer studies the man more closely now. The posture. The quiet confidence. The steady breathing. It almost reminds him of someone. Someone known for staying calm under pressure. Someone whose presence alone can change the atmosphere of a room. Someone like Keanu Reeves. Of course, that would be ridiculous, right? This is just a quiet road. A routine traffic stop. Nothing unusual. But in the next few moments, the officer is about to realize something that will completely change the tone of the encounter. And once that realization hits, the confidence he walked up with may not feel quite the same anymore. The officer takes the license slowly, the small plastic card reflecting the beam of his flashlight. For a moment, everything remains quiet. The road behind them is empty. No passing cars. No distant sounds. Just the faint hum of the patrol vehicle's engine and the soft rustling of the night wind. The young officer glances down at the license. Then back at the driver. Then down again. At first, nothing seems unusual. But the longer he looks at the name, the more something begins to feel familiar. Not shocking. Not dramatic. Just a quiet sense that he may have underestimated the situation. Meanwhile, the driver remains perfectly calm. His posture hasn't changed. Hands still resting on the steering wheel. Breathing steady. Eyes relaxed, observing the officer without challenge or hostility. It's the kind of composure you don't often see during traffic stops. Most drivers shift nervously. They glance at their phones. They rush to explain themselves. But this man simply waits. Patiently. As if he has nothing to prove. The officer clears his throat slightly and flips the license under the flashlight again. Sometimes people forget that the smallest details can trigger recognition. A name. A face. A voice. And in this moment, the officer begins to notice all three. The man sitting in front of him carries a calm presence that feels strangely familiar. Not because of authority. Not because of status. But because the expression on his face resembles someone the officer has seen many times before. Someone known around the world for portraying calm, disciplined characters. Someone whose quiet demeanor often stands out more than loud personalities. Someone like Keanu Reeves. Of course, the officer immediately dismisses the thought. That would be ridiculous. After all, people resemble celebrities all the time. And this is just a late-night traffic stop on a quiet road. Still, the idea lingers for a moment longer than expected. Because the driver's demeanor doesn't feel staged. It feels natural. There's no attempt to impress. No sign of frustration. Just patience. And patience, in situations where most people would react emotionally, can shift the entire atmosphere. The officer steps slightly back from the window, glancing again at the license. His training reminds him to stay professional. Stick to the procedure. Verify the information. Ask the questions. But something about the driver's calm attitude makes the moment feel less like an ordinary stop and more like a quiet test of character. Not a confrontation. Just an interaction between two people in a moment of pressure. And pressure often reveals more about a person than words ever could. The officer takes a slow breath and looks back toward the driver. "Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" he asks. The question hangs in the air for a second. The driver finally speaks, his voice low and respectful. "Not exactly," he replies calmly. There's no sarcasm. No defensiveness. Just honesty. Again, that calm response subtly shifts the tone. Because sometimes authority expects resistance. Or excuses. But calm cooperation often changes the rhythm of the conversation entirely. The officer nods slowly, processing the situation. He studies the driver's face again, this time more carefully. The features, the quiet confidence, the stillness, and suddenly the earlier thought returns. Not as a joke this time, but as a possibility. Could it actually be him? The officer doesn't say anything yet. But in the next few moments, as he checks the information more closely, he's about to realize that this quiet encounter may not be as ordinary as he first assumed. The officer steps back toward his patrol car, the license still in his hand. For a moment, he pauses beside the door instead of immediately getting inside. Something about the situation keeps his attention focused on the driver. Through the windshield, he can still see the man sitting quietly in the car. Not moving. Not checking his phone. Not shifting nervously the way most people do during a traffic stop. Just waiting. Calmly. The officer finally sits in the patrol car and places the license under the interior light. The name is clear now. He reads it once. Then again. And then a third time just to be sure he didn't misread it. His eyebrows tighten slightly. Because sometimes recognition doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it builds slowly, piece by piece. First the name. Then the face. Then the realization that both seem to match. He glances back through the windshield toward the stopped vehicle. The driver hasn't changed position. Still relaxed. Still patient. That kind of patience can create a quiet pressure of its own. Because when someone refuses to react emotionally, it forces the other person to slow down too. The officer exhales slowly and runs the information through the system. Waiting. The radio crackles softly in the background with distant dispatch chatter, but his focus stays on the driver ahead. He tries to convince himself that this is probably nothing. After all, thousands of people share similar names. And plenty of people resemble celebrities. There's something about the driver's composure that feels unusual. Not arrogant. Not defensive. Just steady. And steady behavior tends to stand out in situations where tension usually takes over. The officer looks up again. From this distance, the man's face is partially shadowed by the streetlight above the road. But certain details are unmistakable. The posture. The calm eyes. The quiet expression that suggests someone who has experienced pressure before and learned how to handle it. The officer leans back in his seat slightly. For the first time since the stop began, his confidence softens into curiosity. Because now he isn't just checking a license. He's trying to understand the person behind the wheel. And that curiosity begins to change the dynamic. On the other side of the road, the driver remains completely still. If this situation were recorded and posted online, many viewers would expect tension to rise quickly. Arguments. Voices raised. Someone trying to dominate the moment. But that isn't happening here. Instead, the silence itself becomes the most noticeable part of the encounter. Sometimes calm behavior can shift control without anyone realizing it. Not through intimidation. Not through authority. But simply through composure. The officer finally steps out of the patrol car again, the license still in his hand. As he approaches the vehicle once more, his steps are slightly slower this time. Not hesitant. Just more thoughtful. He reaches the window again and looks inside. The driver turns his head slightly. Their eyes meet for a brief second. And that's when the officer notices something he hadn't paid attention to before. The expression. Not worried. Not irritated. Just patient understanding. It's the same expression many people recognize from interviews and public appearances of Keanu Reeves, an actor often known for staying calm and grounded even in high-pressure situations. Of course, the officer still isn't completely certain. But the possibility is now impossible to ignore. And the next few seconds may confirm whether his suspicion is right. Because sometimes recognition doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment. Sometimes it appears quietly. In the middle of a routine interaction. When someone suddenly realizes that the person in front of them may not be who they first assumed. The officer stands beside the driver's window again, holding the license carefully between his fingers. For a brief moment, neither of them speaks. The quiet road stretches behind them, illuminated only by the flashing blue lights of the patrol car. The officer studies the license one more time. Then he looks at the driver. Then back at the license again. This time the details begin to settle in more clearly. The name, the birth date, the photograph. Everything lines up. The officer exhales slowly as if processing something unexpected. Not shock. Not panic. Just the realization that the situation may not be as simple as he first believed. When he walked up to the car earlier, his posture had been firm and authoritative. Routine procedure. Clear instructions. But now his tone softens slightly. Professional, but more careful. He hands the license back through the window. "Thank you for your patience," he says. The driver accepts the card calmly and places it back into his wallet. No dramatic reaction. No attempt to highlight the moment. Just a quiet nod. That small gesture somehow makes the situation feel even more unusual, because many people, once recognized, might try to shift the power dynamic. They might joke. They might challenge the officer. But the driver does none of that. He remains exactly the same as before. Calm. Respectful. So, the officer glances briefly at the car's interior again. Everything appears ordinary. No signs of agitation. No attempt to rush the interaction. Just someone waiting patiently for the process to finish. For the first time since the stop began, the officer asks a question in a slightly different tone. "Long drive tonight?" It isn't a necessary question. Just a small attempt to ease the tension that had built earlier. The driver smiles faintly. "A bit," he replies. His voice carries the same steady calm the officer noticed from the beginning. Not loud. Not defensive. Just relaxed. That calm presence reinforces the thought that had been forming in the officer's mind. Because the more he listens, the more familiar the driver seems. Many people recognize the quiet demeanor of Keanu Reeves, an actor often known not just for his film roles but for his calm and respectful public interactions. Of course, the officer knows this moment isn't about movies or fame. It's simply a traffic stop. But recognition can still influence how a situation feels. He shifts his weight slightly and glances back toward the patrol car. Then back at the driver. The earlier tension that existed when the stop first began has almost completely disappeared now. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because the atmosphere changed. Sometimes a shift doesn't come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from realization. The officer clears his throat again, returning fully to his professional role. "I pulled you over because your brake light flickered when you slowed down," he explains calmly. The driver nods. "Good to know," he says. "I'll have it checked." No argument. No frustration. Just acknowledgement. That simple response seems to confirm something for the officer. The calm he noticed earlier wasn't an act. It was simply the driver's natural way of handling the situation. Moments like this rarely become dramatic stories. In reality, most interactions end quietly. But what makes this one interesting is the subtle transformation that took place. At the start, the officer believed he was dealing with a routine situation where authority would guide the conversation. Yet the driver's composure quietly shifted the dynamic. Not through status. Not through influence. Just through patience. The officer gives a small nod. "Well, everything else looks fine," he says. "Just take care of that light when you can." The driver nods again. "I will." For a moment, the two simply look at each other. Not as officer and driver, but as two people sharing a brief, calm interaction on a quiet road. Then the officer steps back from the window. "Have a good night," he says. The driver smiles politely. "You too." And just like that, the moment that had once carried quiet tension dissolves into something much simpler. A reminder that sometimes the biggest shifts in a situation don't happen through confrontation, but through calm understanding. If a moment like this were recorded and posted online, the story would probably look very different. In today's world, short clips travel fast. A 20-second video can reach millions of people before anyone fully understands what actually happened. Imagine someone filming the traffic stop from a distance. The flashing police lights. A quiet car pulled over on the side of the road. An officer standing beside the window speaking to the driver. Within minutes, the clip might appear online with a dramatic caption. Something like, "Officer stops man who looks like Keanu Reeves. What happens next is shocking." And instantly the internet would begin doing what it always does. Speculating. Debating. Arguing. People would watch the clip and begin asking questions. Was the officer rude? Was the driver famous? Did the officer recognize him? And most of all, the question that often appears whenever people watch interactions like this. Who won? It's a strange question. Because moments like this aren't competitions. There was no argument, no confrontation, no dramatic reveal. Just two people interacting during a routine situation. But the internet often tries to turn ordinary moments into battles. Someone must be right. Someone must be wrong. Someone must win. Someone must lose. Yet if you actually look at what happened during this quiet traffic stop, that idea doesn't really apply. The officer did his job. He stopped the car. He checked the license. He explained the issue with the brake light. The driver responded respectfully. He listened. He acknowledged the problem. He agreed to fix it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing explosive. And yet, there is still something interesting about the encounter. Because what changed the tone of the situation wasn't authority. And it wasn't fame. It was composure. The driver never raised his voice. He never tried to dominate the conversation. He didn't mention who he might resemble. He simply remained calm. And calm behavior can sometimes shift the entire energy of an interaction. Many people recognize this kind of presence from the public image of Keanu Reeves, who is often described as quiet, thoughtful, and respectful during interviews and public appearances. That reputation has led to countless stories online about moments where simple kindness or patience stood out more than dramatic behavior. But the interesting thing about this encounter isn't whether the driver actually was Keanu Reeves. The interesting part is how the situation unfolded. Because many people assume that power comes from raising your voice, from proving you're right, from forcing the other person to back down. Yet moments like this suggest something different. Real control often appears much quieter. When someone refuses to escalate tension, the entire atmosphere changes. Instead of conflict, the conversation slows down. Instead of competition, it becomes cooperation. And that shift can happen without anyone even realizing it. If viewers online were watching this situation unfold, some might still try to frame it as a victory. Maybe they'd say the officer felt embarrassed. Maybe they'd say the driver handled it perfectly. But in reality, neither person was trying to win anything. The officer remained professional. The driver remained respectful. And the encounter ended the same way thousands of traffic stops do every night. Quietly. Yet the internet often overlooks moments like this because they don't fit dramatic narratives. Calm interactions rarely go viral. Explosive arguments do. Shouting spreads faster than silence. But silence can still hold meaning. Sometimes the most interesting part of a situation isn't what people say. It's what they choose not to say. During this traffic stop, the driver never tried to use status. He never mentioned recognition. He never changed his attitude once the officer's tone shifted. He simply remained the same person from beginning to end. And that consistency is something people rarely notice at first. But when they do notice it, it becomes memorable. Because composure is contagious. When one person stays calm, the other often follows. And suddenly what could have become a tense moment turns into something far more ordinary. Which, in many ways, is the best possible outcome. No conflict. No humiliation. No drama. Just a brief interaction between two people on a quiet road, both moving on with their night. And if someone did happen to upload that moment online, the comments would probably still debate who won. But the truth is simpler than that. Sometimes the strongest outcome is when nobody tries to win at all. Moments like this rarely appear dramatic from the outside. A car pulled over. An officer doing his job. A driver responding calmly. At first glance, it looks like something ordinary, the kind of interaction that happens thousands of times every night across quiet roads and busy highways. But sometimes the most meaningful lessons hide inside the simplest situations. Because pressure reveals something important about people. Not the kind of pressure that comes from danger. But the subtle pressure that appears when someone feels challenged, judged, or misunderstood. Many people respond to that pressure with emotion. Voices rise. Defensiveness appears. Egos step forward. And suddenly a small moment becomes a bigger conflict. But every once in a while, someone responds differently. Instead of reacting, they pause. Instead of escalating the situation, they slow it down. And that single decision changes everything. During this traffic stop, the driver never tried to prove anything. He didn't rush to explain himself. He didn't question the officer's authority. He didn't attempt to shift the situation in his favor. He simply remained calm from beginning to end. That kind of calm can feel surprising in moments where tension usually grows. But it's also a powerful reminder of something many people forget. Control doesn't always come from taking charge of a situation. Sometimes it comes from controlling yourself. When someone manages their reactions carefully, the entire interaction becomes easier for everyone involved. Think about how often everyday conflicts begin with small misunderstandings. a comment taken the wrong way, a mistake interpreted as disrespect, a moment of impatience that turns into an argument. Most of those situations escalate because both sides react emotionally at the same time. But when one person chooses not to escalate, the situation often changes direction. Calm behavior creates space. Space allows people to think. And thinking leads to better decisions. This idea appears often when people talk about the public personality of Keanu Reeves. In interviews and stories shared by others, he's frequently described as someone who remains grounded even when surrounded by fame and attention. Not because he tries to appear impressive, but because he approaches situations quietly and thoughtfully. That reputation has made him an interesting example in conversations about discipline and emotional control. Yet the lesson from this story isn't really about celebrities at all. It's about something much more relatable. Every person experiences moments where they feel challenged. At work, on the road, in conversations with strangers, in disagreements with friends or family. And during those moments, people often feel pressure to defend themselves immediately, to prove their point, to make sure they aren't misunderstood. But sometimes the strongest response is simply patience, pausing before reacting, listening before arguing, allowing the situation to settle before deciding what to say. That kind of discipline takes practice, because staying calm doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means choosing the right moment to address them. In this traffic stop, nothing dramatic needed to happen. The officer did his job. The driver listened. Both people treated each other with respect. And because neither person tried to dominate the moment, the interaction ended peacefully. It's easy to overlook how important that outcome actually is. Peaceful endings rarely become headlines. They rarely appear in viral videos. But they represent something valuable. The ability of people to handle pressure without turning it into conflict. That ability becomes more important in a world where many conversations feel rushed, loud, and reactive. Sometimes strength is misunderstood as being louder than everyone else. But real strength often appears much quieter. It's visible in patience, in self-control, in the decision to remain steady even when emotions could easily take over. And that kind of strength doesn't belong only to actors, officers, or public figures. Anyone can practice it. Everyday life provides countless opportunities to do exactly that. A difficult conversation, a stressful situation, a moment where someone expects anger or frustration, and instead you choose calm. When that happens, something interesting often occurs. The entire atmosphere changes, because calm behavior invites calm responses. And suddenly what could have become a problem turns into something much simpler. Just like this quiet moment on a dark road. Two people, a routine interaction, and a reminder that composure can transform even the most ordinary situations into lessons about character. The road eventually returns to silence. The patrol car's flashing lights fade as the officer pulls back into traffic. The other car slowly drives away into the night. Within a few seconds, the moment is over. No confrontation. No raised voices. No dramatic ending. Just two people continuing their journeys in opposite directions. And yet, moments like this often stay in memory longer than expected. Not because something extraordinary happened, but because something didn't happen. There was no conflict. No attempt to dominate the situation. No effort to prove superiority. Just calm interaction between two people in a moment that could easily have turned tense. Many people believe strength reveals itself in loud situations. Arguments. Showdowns. Moments where someone forces another person to back down. But the truth is often quieter than that. Real strength sometimes appears in the ability to stay steady when pressure begins to rise. Think about how many conflicts in everyday life start with a simple spark. A misunderstanding. A rushed assumption. A comment taken personally. Suddenly two people feel the need to defend themselves. Voices get louder. Body language becomes tense. And a small moment grows into something far bigger than it ever needed to be. But occasionally someone interrupts that pattern. Not by overpowering the situation. Not by winning an argument. But by refusing to escalate. They listen. They pause. They respond calmly instead of reacting emotionally. And in doing so, they quietly change the direction of the moment. During this late-night traffic stop, the driver never tried to turn the situation into a contest. He didn't challenge the officer's authority. He didn't act offended. He didn't attempt to make the moment about recognition or status. Instead, he remained the same person from the first second to the last. Calm, patient, respectful. That kind of consistency can feel surprising in a world where people often expect tension during interactions like this. Yet consistency is one of the strongest signals of genuine confidence. People who feel secure rarely need to prove anything. They simply move through situations with quiet awareness. This idea often appears in discussions about the public image of Keanu Reeves. Over the years, many stories about him have circulated online. Stories describing acts of kindness, moments of patience, encounters where he treated strangers with the same respect he offers colleagues and friends. Whether every story is perfectly accurate doesn't matter as much as the larger message people take from them. The message is simple. Calm character leaves a lasting impression. When someone handles pressure with patience instead of ego, others tend to notice. Not immediately, perhaps, but eventually, because composure stands out in environments where emotion often dominates. The officer in this story likely returned to his routine patrol shortly afterward. Another car might pass. Another traffic stop might occur. Most nights on the road follow the same rhythm. But it's possible that this particular interaction stayed in his mind a little longer than the others. Not because he met someone recognizable, but because the encounter reminded him of something important. Professional interactions work best when both sides remain respectful. Authority functions smoothly when it meets cooperation. And tension fades quickly when neither person tries to escalate it. Those lessons extend far beyond a quiet road at night. They appear in workplaces, in conversations between strangers, in disagreements between friends. Every day people face moments where they can choose how to respond. React quickly, or pause and think, push harder, or step back and listen, demand to be right, or simply allow the situation to settle. Each choice shapes the outcome in subtle ways. Many viral videos online highlight dramatic confrontations, people shouting, arguments exploding in public, moments where someone insists on proving dominance. Those clips spread rapidly because they trigger strong reactions. But the quieter stories, the ones where people manage situations calmly, often carry deeper lessons. They show what happens when someone breaks the usual pattern of escalation. Instead of adding fuel to the moment, they remove it. Instead of reacting with emotion, they respond with awareness. And the result is something much more peaceful than anyone expected. Perhaps that's the real takeaway from this story. Strength isn't always visible in dramatic victories. Confidence doesn't require applause. And the strongest person in a tense moment might simply be the one who refuses to turn it into a battle. Because sometimes the most powerful response isn't confrontation at all. It's composure. Maybe the strongest person in the room isn't the one who wins the argument. It's the one who never needed one in the first place. And if that idea changes the way you see strength even slightly, then the lesson of this quiet moment has already done its job.